Welcome to My Money, Your Money, a talk show on generational wealth, wealth management, and personal finance. Now introducing our host, Ms. Brigette Lumpkins.
Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to My Money, Your Money, where we talk about all things money with the goal of closing the racial wealth gap. Today's show is brought to you by our generous sponsors, Demesman and Dover Accident Attorneys, the AARP, the Palm Beach Solid Waste Authority, and FAMU Mary. I'm your host, Brigette Lumpkins. I earned an MBA from Wharton and have worked at such firms as Goldman Sachs, Lehman Brothers, and Barclays Capital, serving institutional and private clients, as well as raising capital for investment funds. I'm so pleased tonight to welcome two guests, Dr. Andre Perry, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution and a Scholar in Residence at American University in Washington, D.C., and Dr. Marcus Bright, the new Youth Services Administrator for the Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust, also known as MDEAT. Welcome, Marcus and Andre. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, Brigette.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Before we get started with the meat of the conversation, I'm sure our audience would like to hear more about both of you. Andre, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, well, hello, Miami. I'm Andre Perry, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, as was mentioned, and I study Black majority cities, places where the share of the Black population is 50% or higher. But in particular, I study and value the assets in those places. So I determine the value of homes, businesses, infrastructure in majority Black places, so I can understand the penalty that Black tax that we often say or say colloquially. So then we can figure out ways to restore the value that's been extracted by racism. So I do that at the Brookings Institution, and I'm the author of Know Your Price: Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. And we will be talking more in depth tomorrow, and you'll hear more about that later on.
Well, as a native of Washington, D.C., one of our favorite majority Black cities, at least when I was growing up there, I am really fascinated to hear what you have to say about what's happened there and other places. So we'll have to talk more about this later. And Marcus, can you tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I recently joined the Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust, which has the mission of ensuring equitable participation in Miami's economic growth. And I work collaboratively with two other divisions, housing and economic development, under our great leader, Mr. Bill Diggs. Most of my background is in higher education, in the nonprofit and social justice spaces. I published over 150 articles in publications like the Huffington Post, Rio, Miami Herald. I've taught at 5 universities, FIU, FAU, Lynn University, University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and the City University of New York. But I'm here today. We're very excited about an event coming up Thursday in Miami. Know Your Price with Dr. Andre Perry.
That's great. And I love Bill. He's been doing great work in this city for a really long time. So I'm sure he's a great leader for that agency. So getting right into it, according to U.S. Census data, owner-occupied units in South Florida's Black majority neighborhoods are valued at $41,012 less than comparable homes in non-Black majority neighborhoods. So this systematic devaluation equates to nearly $2.37 billion in stolen wealth for Black owners in Black majority areas. To reverse this wealth erasing trend, MDEAT, the premier agency for economic development of Miami-Dade County's Black community, is hosting this event on Thursday featuring Andre. And so can you tell us more about that event?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Thursday, 6 p.m., Ampersand Studios, that's 31 Northeast 17th Street, will be hosting Dr. Andre Perry, in my opinion, the foremost expert on this topic in terms of the devaluation of Black assets as it pertains to housing. But we want to even go, if you get his book, Know Your Price, he goes into the devaluation of Blacks, of the stigmatization of Blacks, and the devaluation of assets in the educational space, in economics, and the criminal justice system. And so we're going to dive deeply into that. and have a Miami focus to it. As you know, we're number one in America in terms of housing unaffordability. We're number one in terms of economic inequality. We have tremendous challenges, but we also have tremendous opportunities. We're also number one in tech job sector growth. There's a tech boom going on here. We didn't land on Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has landed on us. There's an opportunity for us to participate.
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, Dr. Perry talks about this in his native Pittsburgh. As he was writing in the book, it was undergoing a tech boom as well, having challenges with housing. So we're just looking forward to the conversation. Everybody come out and join us. We're going to have policymakers. We're going to have folks who really want to make systemic and meaningful change in Miami-Dade County.
I mean, that's a cause really dear to my heart. I live right on the edge of Little Haiti and just had a 30% rent increase myself. Mm-hmm. So it's something that, and I work in the sector, so, it's created opportunity and landed on me personally at the same time. So, I have a lot of empathy for people who didn't get a job in the sector and still got those kinds of rent increase or being pushed out of their homes, which were previously devalued. So I think that's going to be a great conversation. Let's talk a little bit more about MDEAT and your role, Marcus, within the organization specifically. Beyond the scope of this particular event, what are some of the other things that you do as part of your role?
Well, as you mentioned, there's a need to really accelerate the preparation for economic prosperity, both for youth and for families. And tomorrow, we're hosting a Power Summit at FIU North Covens Conference Center. And I bring that up because we're going to accelerate in each of the focus areas of the summit. So one focus area is economic opportunity in the digital age. That is unpacking what's going on with blockchain technology, unpacking what's going on with cryptocurrency, seeing what the opportunities are, smart contracts, and the like. We're going to have experts talking about that. We're going to have programming throughout the year in dealing with that. We also going to have a workshop on law enforcement encounters, improving police and youth relations, trying to disrupt the school to prison pipeline by improving the way that youth see the police, the way police see the community, working together in that way. We mentioned Silicon Valley coming here. There'll be a workshop and programming throughout the year on tech career pathways. What are these tech jobs? How do we prepare ourselves? How do we get involved? How do we actually get in the door? Legal career pathways. We also have a workshop dealing with legal career pathways with judges, with attorneys. We have a teen court program that is under the auspices of the Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust. That is an alternative sanctioning program for youthful offenders to provide a second chance as opposed to going into the criminal justice system. And youth are participating as attorneys, as jurors, as bailiffs, as clerks. So we want to build an intentional pipeline so that we can make up the future of the criminal justice system. We'll also have a workshop on mental health and emotional intelligence, destroying the boundaries that we set for ourselves. One of the consequences of external devaluation is when we make agreement with it and we internally devalue ourselves and have outsized inferiority and feelings of inadequacy. We have licensed professionals who are going to be here tomorrow, again, 9 a.m., FIU North Campus Covens Conference Center, but we'll also have programming throughout the year. And then finally, business and entrepreneurship. The Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust, that is building Black businesses. We're in the midst of Black Business Month, understanding how to get access to capital, understanding how to leverage the resources that are already here and available in Miami-Dade County. And to top it off, we got a keynote speaker, Isaiah Thomas, MBA Hall of Famer, entrepreneur, owner of several businesses. He's gonna warm it up. He's gonna warm up the plate for Brother Perry on Thursday. So we got Zeke, Hall of Famer, entrepreneur on Wednesday, FIU North Campus, and then we got the big dog, the scholar, Dr. Andre Perry, Brookings Institution, coming in Thursday evening, Ampersand Studios, Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust. We doing it big.
Well, that was a lot. And I mean, it sounds like you're really active. And I think that's great. You touched on so many really important things. And all of those things really do affect the racial wealth gap. And so I think it's really thoughtful that you're addressing mental health issues and helping people to upskill or cross-train or directing them into tech careers. And also, finance is a big industry that's migrated here in large numbers and is affecting not only sort of the income inequality, but also offering opportunity at the same time. So how do we get on the opportunity end of that? So really admire the work you're doing that. Now, Andre, you've pioneered volumes of scholarship about how Black assets are devalued. You talked about at the top of the program compared to their white counterparts. Can you talk about your discoveries and how they tactically impact Black Americans who are reaching for that American dream?
Yeah, well, in 2018, we took it upon ourselves to look at the value of homes in Black neighborhoods, because as you know, the value of homes determines so much of urban and municipal policy. They fund our schools, they pay for infrastructure and other things. So the value of homes really do matter for all of us. And so we started looking at homes in Black neighborhoods and comparing them to their white counterparts. And we controlled for education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics. And what that means statistically is we attended to all of those different items. So we wanted to get an apples to apples comparison. That's a 2-bedroom home with certain square footage, and compare that to another in a different neighborhood, except for the composition of race. And after controlling for all those variables, we found that homes in Black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23% across the nation, about $48,000 per home. Cumulatively, there's about $156 billion in lost equity throughout the United States in Black neighborhoods, $156 billion. And I'll just want to, it's a big number, but I want to put a highlight in what that means. 156 billion would have financed more than 4 million Black-owned firms based upon the average amount Black people use to start their businesses. It would have paid for more than 8 million 4-year degrees based upon the average amount of a 4-year public education. It would have replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan 3,000 times over. It's more than double the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. It would have covered all of Hurricane Katrina damage. It's a big number.
Yeah.
So when we talk about what goes on in Black communities, I always say that there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. That we ultimately have to restore value that's extracted from our communities without anyone batting an eye, carrying a tiki torch, or wearing a white hood. That there are structures in place that devalue our homes, our businesses, our commercial property. And what I'm going to do tomorrow is just talk about that, because these things do have an effect. And what Dr. Bright was talking about, it does have an effect on our mental health, our how we view each other, how we view the rest of the world. And so but if we don't change these structures, it'll be very hard to get at some of these things that Dr. Bright and others are working on. And so, and then in your work in particular, Brigette, this is the money, the equity is the money we use to invest in other things.
Right.
And so if you don't have your equity in home, and let's not forget, you may not own a home, but you can certainly invest in a commercial property, because
Right.
you get outside gains from those kind of things. So you don't necessarily, the goal is to own many different things. And I will say this, I know a lot of people may not like this, but I also say that we need to talk about wealth building beyond home ownership.
Oh, definitely. I'm a huge advocate of that. It's not always practical. You may not be able to enter the market for so many reasons, but that doesn't mean you're stuck not building wealth because buying a home isn't feasible. You can raise money by investing in the stock market and accelerate your saving toward a down payment. And as an investment professional, I see portfolios who's done asset allocation over portfolios for very wealthy families. Real estate is part of the portfolio, but a lot of wealthy people don't even own the home they live in. They've invested elsewhere because they want to live a certain place where they don't think it's a good value proposition to buy. For example, I'm in that position, actually, not the wealthy position, the living position.
No, but let me tell you, I mean, people figure out ways
to
to restore value where there's pent up value. So what I do essentially is I study the underappreciated assets in communities, meaning if you just add water, it will grow.
Right.
And so there are lots of assets in our community that if we could invest in now, and we add that water, it will grow. And so that we'll talk about that tomorrow, because there's lots of potential in Miami. And I completely agree with what you're stating, that this conversation about property and businesses is really a metaphor for a larger issue. We need to figure out ways to build generational wealth to pass on, so that when the next inevitable crisis hits, we'll have the financial cushion to withstand it.
I think it's hitting, one. And number two, yeah, homeownership is a proxy for all of these other things. And so you talk, I mean, I really am very fascinated, and I'm sure our audience is too, about the work you do and the conclusions and the observations you've made. And they follow into our own intuition. I think that we sort of already know this, but you've gone out and proved it, which is great. But when you talk about quote unquote ending racism as a solution, that's a lofty goal. So what are the sort of practical solutions that you propose, or is that something you're going to talk about tomorrow?
Yeah.
With regard to policy, or what we can do, because maybe we as a community can't rely on policy. So what can we as individuals and as a collective in the community do to accelerate the value, to catch up? You know, because we have already learned, depending on others to value us may not, you know, we could be waiting forever. I'm still waiting on my 40 acres and a mule. My family is due that.
Yeah. And it, you know, and I won't talk a lot about it, but I do believe in reparations, and the reparations movement is growing. I mean, literally 30 years ago, only less than 10% of people actually supported reparations. It's up to 30%. You're actually seeing reparations programs sprout in different municipalities at the local level. Of course, we want something at the national level, a congressional act, but that's already occurring. But beside that, part of my goal is to restore the value that's been extracted by racism. And we can do that through tax credits, through micro loans and grants to homeowners. We do that through business development. Remember, commercial corridors are critical to not only growing your wealth profile, but growing businesses. So I'll talk a lot about this effort to buy back the block. And we hear that a lot, but we're actually engaged in an activity to do it in various places, and hopefully we'll get to do that in Miami. But in general, there's a few things you have to do. You have to invest directly into people. If you invest in brick and mortar and not people, you'll essentially raise property values and people will be pushed out. So you got to figure out ways to get capital to people through direct investments. I say cut the check for your business loans, down payment assistance, but also there's tax credits, microloans, and other things that we can target to communities in devalued neighborhoods, so that we can figure out the strategies to animate the assets to get the value. So you'll hear a lot about that tomorrow, but there are definitely solutions. And one more thing, the Biden administration has really taken on a lot of my policies. They've gone after appraisers with the PAVE initiative, the Property Appraisal Valuation Task Force. I'm forgetting the acronym.
It's equity.
That's right. There you go. And then and so they've taken it on to do a lot of regulation about appraisal. My only issue with that, while I certainly endorse that issue built around my research, I say that the lost value is just not a result of appraisers. And you got to talk about lending behavior. You got to talk about real estate agent behavior. It's not just one occupation that's driving this. And so there's solutions abound, and we'll get to a lot of that in Miami, because Miami has very nuanced things going on and opportunities going on. So we'll talk about a lot of that.
Well, that's really fascinating. Back to Marcus. Can you talk a little bit, given the mandate for MDEAT, how these trends affect young people, and what is MDEAT seeking to do to equip young people with tools, to combat the devaluation of our property and lives? locally and just broadly speaking?
Well, I mentioned a lot of what we were doing from a programmatic standpoint, but we certainly want to address things from a policy advocacy standpoint as well, which is why we're looking forward to hearing from Dr. Perry and having that policy conversation about some of the best ways to move forward, how to uh, unlock some of the dormant value, both in terms of housing and in other areas, and then where we need to go, or where we need to push from a policy standpoint. Let me just give a correction. It's Thursday, not tomorrow. Thursday, August 11th, 6 p.m. Ampersand Studios, 31 Northeast 17th Street. Thursday, August 11th, downtown Miami. Meet us there. Be a part of the solution. We made a lot of progress overall in this community, but progress without equity is injustice. And the mandate for the Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust is to bring equity to the economic participation and economic growth. And so we hope that you all will join us for this conversation to think about, to come and galvanize and organize around some policy pushes and policy solutions. And I'll just say one thing in terms of a undervalued asset that could be transferable. In the Black majority neighborhoods in Miami, Florida, we produce the best football players in the world. In the world, in Liberty City and Overtown, in Miami Gardens, and Opelika, and Goulds, in the world. And so one of the things that we're actually looking to do, we're working on a pilot program with Google software engineer named Randy Raymond, to identify there's a new computational thinking assessment. This is one thing that we're doing, new computational thinking assessment, where you can identify those students who may already be naturally gifted in software engineering, in computer science, in the same way that you would identify a young man that runs fast or is 6'3" in middle school, and you put him in AAU, and you put him in all of these camps, and you build a pipeline of success around them. We want to do things like that, or develop those kind of pipelines in other sectors as well, because we do have models of success right here. With these high schools here, but they don't even have their own stadium. They play in Trash Pal Stadium and some other neutral sites. With the equipment is not better.
Right.
But they're doing something to produce world class athletes and championship teams, and we can take some of that formula and transfer it to other areas as it pertains to youth development.
Now, I really find that fascinating, because when you think about how you evaluate intellectual talent, which is a little different from how you evaluate athletic talent, I think about standardized testing, and I think about the disadvantages Black people traditionally have when it comes to standardized testing. So is this engineer or the software engineer working on evaluation methods that are culturally sensitive in such a way that it can unlock Black talent by not using the same measuring stick that sort of locks us out of a lot of academic opportunity, which is kind of why HBCUs are still relevant, right?
Yeah.
But
So that's why this is going to be a soft launch moving into the spring. We're planning now, but we're going to do a myriad of different programming, some for everybody. It's like with basketball, everybody plays in PE and everybody plays, but there are some who show the interest, who may have some natural inclination, but we want to make sure that it's accessible to everyone. But we want to start somewhere in terms of having some kind of replication system for what we're doing in athletics, and we can't be afraid, I think, to look at it holistically in terms of what we're able to produce. Because the fact is that I don't believe the housing prices here are coming down. We're going to have to get more people in higher wage jobs and higher wage careers, higher wage entrepreneurship opportunities.
right.
Because right now we're overrepresented in the low wage sector, and if the trajectory doesn't change, I may be doing this next year from somewhere in Mississippi or Alabama, because I can't afford to live here. That's
Right.
the thing. I spent 4 years with the 5,000 room model residence project. We sent 52 boys to Tennessee State University. They're going on full scholarships this year. My question is, when they graduate in 4 years, how many will be able to afford to live here
Right.
on their own?
Yeah, no, and that's changed drastically since I first migrated to Miami a long time ago, but I won't tell you exactly how long. But it was really cheap to live here back then, and not so much later, which really sort of leads me to a segue about gentrification. And so you have these homes that are undervalued and maybe get bought right
Yeah.
at a low valuation, and then next thing you know, you look up and there goes the neighborhood. This is a big issue in Washington, D.C., my hometown, where you live, Andre. And so, and to your point, Marcus, about people who leave the communities they grew up in and can't afford to move back. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that a topic you're going to address tomorrow?
Oh, absolutely.
Or on Thursday?
Oh,
Thursday.
absolutely, because as you stated, when property is of a lower value, people with means grab them up in bulk.
Yeah.
And so, what we do need to understand that there are different modes of property ownership now. We're doing community land trusts where you separate the housing from the actual land itself to make housing more affordable. You do throttle the wealth building aspect somewhat, but you stabilize your home, so you're not subjected to rent changes every year or two.
Right.
And so we just need to figure out what we have. I said just that's a bit, figure out what's in our grasp and figure out ways to hold on and to create affordable housing. But remember, municipalities, city governments in particular, are still the largest land and property owners in an area. And so there's a lot elected officials can do in terms of zoning ordinances to make a housing affordable. But we seldom forget that during these master planning sessions and at city councils and different planning sessions at the county level, we don't have those advocates at least pushing for these kind of preventative policies on the front end. And so when we don't have that on the front end, it's easy for a developer who has lots of money for a government official to say, hey, we'll sell it on this property for pennies on the dollar, because that elected official will get outsized political and economic returns. They'll say, look, we developed this area and we've done this, and all the while you've just displaced your other residents in doing so.
Right.
And so for me, this is about figuring out how to also mobilize our political leaders to say, hey, look, yes, it will take a longer strategy to build up youth, to build up adults, to upskill. It takes a longer set of a different type of development money, where you don't want immediate returns, you want long-term return. So those are the kind of things we need to just have serious conversations about, because I guarantee you, and if we're talking about white folks struggling, we have a response. The PPP loan fiasco in many ways was a response to white business leaders. And so while we, people talk about, reparations is no go. Well, different groups get reparations almost, all the time, and no one bats an eye when we tell businesses to shutter their firms. The business community say, hey, you got to make us whole. Guess what we did? We created a PPP loan program and made people whole. The problem with that is 95% of Black businesses are sole proprietorship, so we didn't qualify at first. And so we didn't get that windfall for the most part. But if these policies were centered around our needs, we would have gotten that. So there's a political conversation that we need to have that goes along with our economic conversations. And so hopefully we'll do that tomorrow as well.
Right. Well, I think what you really, just the big message takeaway from what you said is just vote locally. Don't just focus on the presidential election every 4 years. The president really can only do so much. And when it comes to whether or not you can afford to live where you want to live, really your city council has more to do with that than the president, for sure. And your state representative and all that kind of stuff. So we're almost out of time. This has been a great conversation. One more time, I want you to give me the details for tomorrow. For Thursday, so that people can come on Thursday, August 11th.
Thursday, August 11th, 6 p.m., Ampersand Studios, downtown Miami, 31 Northeast 17th Street. Register at www.miamidade.gov/economic advocacy trust. The status quo cannot stand. Status quo cannot stand. It is time now for action. It's time to organize. It's time to strategize. It's time to move. It's time to put the pressure on. The pressure has been turned on us, and we're gonna turn it right back. We're up for the challenge. Miami-Dade County, let's go.
That's great. That's a great note to end on. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate your time this evening. Please watch our other MIA Media Group shows. Mondays, The Business of Black Business at 1 p.m. with Jay Reynolds. Tuesday, My Money, Your Money at 7 p.m. with yours truly, Brigette Lumpkins. Wednesday, Soul at 7 p.m. with Nikki Gellin. Thursdays, Lunch with Legacy Leaders at noon with Anne-Marie Sorrell and The Flavor of South Florida at 7 p.m. with the legendary Chef Irene. And Fridays at 2 p.m., Black Health with Dr. Michelle Kirwan. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's work together to close that gap.